So without any further ado, I won't wait too long because I think I don't want to lose anybody that we have. We're not trying to we're recording this event and we're going to share this as like a public benefit with everybody, both our members of Rise Prince George's as well as the public at large. And so my name's Bernard Holloway. I wanted to say hello and welcome to everybody. I'm joined by Kyle Reeder, who's the co-chair of Rise Prince George's, which is a group of folks all over the county. So members and residents and activists just like you from North Central and Southern Prince George's who are fighting for affordable and accessible housing, are fighting for vibrant and diverse placemaking and sustainable transportation all over Prince George's. And a big part of that is making sure that we get land use and zoning right, both in terms of where and how we both encourage growth and make sure that we make it easy for the private sector to do the right thing when it comes to like activating development around our metro stations and around our established communities inside the Beltway. We're gonna get to our planning board chair, Peter Shapiro, here in a second for some introductions, but I just wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge a few folks on the call here. A thank you to Halim and Ali and the rest of our steering committee members. I think Levon Reedy Thomas might join us from the road, but we have a really hardy group of around 6 folks that help us every month plan these events, both our Zoom events, our in-person events, as well as the rest of our activists in public education. And it wouldn't be without their support and help that this would be possible. So I wanted to thank them. I wanted to thank Kyle Reeder, our fellow co-chair of Rise Prince George's, who's going to be manning the chat today and making sure that everybody's questions and comments are highly involved. And our fearless leader and policy director, Cheryl Court, if you just want to take a moment to say hi to everybody and deliver some greetings before we get started.
Hey, thanks so much, Bernard, Kyle, and Chairman Shapiro. I'm so glad to be here with so many folks. We're really excited to have this discussion. We're glad that we have, a lot of a variety of views and a lot of strongly held views. And I think this is a great opportunity to have this discussion and really figure out the way forward for Prince George's County.
Thank you, Cheryl. And without any further ado, we're going to turn to our guest of honor for today. And I really think of Peter Shapiro as the perfect person to have like what I really have thought of is like tonight as like a really town hall conversation and open forum around the future of growth and development in Prince George's. So part of this relates to the townhouse moratorium, part of this relates to the importance of creating accessible and affordable housing, which I think is like the truest form of progressivism, making sure that we have housing as a human right for folks. And we think about that, that's just in terms of short-term conditions, but also medium and long-term problem solving, which is something that Peter has really done ever since he started as like a young community activist and planner back in the late 90s in Prince George's, helping some of the municipalities in the Gateway Arts District come together and think about what would be a community-led vision for economic development, which led for him to initially start as an organizer and civic activist, just like many of you all on this call, viewing planning and zoning and development issues from that perspective. He then got elevated by his neighbors to spend about 6 years as a policymaker on the county council, where he was really instrumental in doing a lot of the legislating around the land use and zoning that supported the Hyattsville Arts District corridor, and both the mix of taxes and incentives and public infrastructure that made that development possible, along with some allowances for density and housing to make that a really dynamic, vibrant place. And then since then, he's done a lot of work both in Prince George's and Montgomery, as what Cheryl would like to say is as a planning nerd and a subject matter expert on zoning and development issues, as both a zoning commissioner here in Prince George's, but also across the line in the District of Columbia, where he's been a real leader in the region and throughout the country on all of these matters. And if that wasn't enough, he also had done some work prior to his leadership of the planning board as the director of the Revenue Authority in Prince George's, which does a lot of important work, not just regulating our parking decks, which we need more and better of them, not just at National Harbor, but in all other parts of the county to help unlock more placemaking, in my personal opinion. But separately from all that, they also have a lot of land ownership of some really key property sites, not only in Largo, but in Suitland and other parts of the county. And Peter and the team over at the Revenue Authority, in concert with the Redevelopment Authority and a few other folks, has been really catalytic over the years in helping to push forward some of the major opportunities that the county sees to create new walkable urban spaces. And so that's why we think a lot of him here over at CSG, and his perspective of having many hats, both as a civic activist, as a policymaker, at the county council and district council level, and as an agency leader, we thought would be really important to bring to this, in addition to his formal role as the chair of the Prince George's Planning Board. So without any further ado, Mr. Shapiro, take the floor.
Wait, actually, Chairman Shapiro and Bernard, I actually wanted us to do a quick set of polls to get a
Sure.
sense of the audience.
Sure.
I'm gonna launch the polls.
Okay. And I thought we could do that before questions. I was just going to break it up, Cheryl, but that's fine.
Oh, okay.
That's
Do I
fine.
get to answer? Do I get to answer the poll too?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, so can folks see the polls?
Yeah, I can see them. Can everybody else see them? I see like we have 0 to 69. Let's start answering, folks. It should pop.
3 questions. Where do you live?
That sounds great. Thank you. So the 3 questions are like, where do you live? Like you just answer whatever council district that you live in to the best of your knowledge, or the last one that you voted in. The second one would be, did you support the townhouse moratorium bill? So that's Council Bill 52, sponsored by Councilmember Blagay. That could be a yes or a no. And then question number 3 is, what do you think is Prince George's biggest land use and development problem? We had 3 like options for folks. Just pick the one that speaks the most to you, whether that's too much growth in new development in suburban and rural areas far from services and infrastructure, too much growth in new development in all parts of the county, or lack of growth and investment in designated transit district local centers and inside the Beltway communities. And we'll give it another 30 seconds before we close out the polls. And then we'll turn it over to Chairman Shapiro. And folks can kind of reflect on the poll results as he gets started. Cheryl, is that cool? Like, can we close out the poll for now?
Yep. I'll take it down.
Cool. And this will give everybody a chance to see a snapshot of where we're at. When we get back to some of the Q&A, we can maybe launch, like open up the window again if more people want to like chime in and offer some additional responses. But we have a really diverse set of folks from all corners of the county. And we're definitely going to get into like discussing all of the topics of questions 2 and 3. So I want to give Peter a chance to start this conversation. I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then we're going to open it up for everybody else to get involved as well. Thanks so much. Chairman Shapiro.
Thank you. Thanks, Bernard. I appreciate that. The kind words, as always. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. And I just looked through the participant list, and there's a lot of, so talk about the breadth and depth of the county. It was nice to see. And we have a former planning board chair on there, former council member. There's a fellow commissioner on there. We have some staff from planning department, Parks and Rec, and of course, all sorts of community activists, community leaders, neighbors, and things like that, friends. Some folks are angry at me, I'm sure, just the range, the gamut, and it's great to see. So I'm going to talk for, I don't know, I haven't really timed it. I'm going to guess I'm going to be talking for about 10 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more. And the goal really is to open this up and have this be a town hall conversation and to provide as much opportunity for questions and dialogue and back and forth and all that. So what's the threshold question here is, you know, how do we address the concern that there's too much development that's either residential, commercial, industrial in the wrong place, and either not in the right place or not enough in the right place. And then how do we concretize what we consider the right and wrong places? This is kind of at the core of the journey that we've been on for decades in the county. And I've been a part of this for a good chunk of time. And it was over 20 years ago when I was on the council. And yes, that means I'm old. Young at heart, but old. And I helped spearhead the effort to designate the 3 tiers of county land way back when. This is in 2002. So then it was a new idea to make it clear that we had urban, developing, and rural tiers. now that feels like a small step, but at the time it was a really good step for the county, and it set us in a healthy direction. In addition to that journey, and I'll talk more about that in a sec, but there's also the issue of equity. And when you look at zoning through an equity lens, so much of zoning historically, and arguably even today, is tied to issues around exclusion or redlining. In short, there's so much around zoning that can get caught up in keeping those people out. How we define those people changes depending on the context. Often it's around race or ethnic or religious lines. It can also be around class lines. But this is a big piece of what's been behind, either covertly or often overtly, some of the zoning decisions. And we see a whole lot of literature and a whole lot of conversation and even organizing now around the problems connected to detached large lot single family residential zoning, and sort of what was the politics behind that. So I'm mindful of all that with everything that we're doing here in the county as well. I just think that's an important piece to have as part of the conversation. So what's the goal here? Again, it's that continuous journey that we've been on around the right and wrong places and the right and wrong product in those places. Plan 2035 was adopted by the council in 2014. I think it was May of 2014, and this was really a generational shift in the county's approach to land use and real estate development. At its core, the goal was to steer most growth into identified centers. I think there was 25 or so identified centers, and half that growth was supposed to happen in the regional ones. What were called the regional transit districts. These were the ones where we wanted to see denser, high quality mixed use development, served by rail. Another goal was to put the brakes on the suburban sprawl, holding the growth to the established communities, what was then called the developed tier, urban tier. There was a specific percentage tied to it. 20% of total growth was supposed to be in that established tier. And then the idea was to have virtually no growth in the rural agricultural areas, what was then the rural tier. So in other words, success, how we define success here in this conversation, for me at least, is in part figuring out how we can better achieve the goals of the 2035 plan, Prince George's 2035, because I think that really was moving us in the right direction. So what's the good news? In the 9 years since its adoption, Plan 2035 has made a difference. It's successfully, first of all, it's penetrated the public consciousness. We are all talking about it. Many community leaders have embraced it. Many elected officials talk about it. Even the real estate community talks about it and wants to show that their projects are consistent with it. Not always, but the county has adopted a new zoning ordinance that rezoned all the centers into new mixed-use, pedestrian-friendly zones. That reflect the goals for that center as laid out in Plan 2035. So growth in Plan 2035 has increased relative to the established communities, although not as quickly as we like. So since 2014, these are, according to my team, the numbers they provided me, since 2014, housing has grown 27% in the regional transit centers, 10% in local centers, and only 3% in the established communities. Jobs have grown 20% in the regional transit centers and only 4% in the established communities. So the trend is moving in the right direction. There's still a lot of work to be done, of course. The development trends, while moving in the right direction, it's clear, according to our projections, that we're not going to meet the goals of Plan 2035 by the target year unless we do additional effort, even more. So of particular concern, although growth has slowed in suburbia, the current rate of growth is calculated on a very, very large base, meaning there's still way too much development in absolute numbers. So there's still more development in this suburban tier than we would like to see. Part of the problem is if you're a developer, urban development is still harder to accomplish than greenfield development. It's just more expensive. It's more complex. When doing urban development, it's harder to assemble the land. You got to deal with utilities, roads, stormwater issues, financing. There's issues around, community impact too, because things tend to be closer together. There's also a huge pipeline of already approved suburban projects. I mean, there are tens of thousands of dwelling units and millions of square feet of commercial development. This isn't all going to get built, but the projects have a right to develop, and many of them are going to occur. So, what is future success going to look like? What can we do moving forward? I mean, a big piece of it really is zoning. Zoning. So for suburban land that's not already entitled, what could we do? Well, the council could downzone as it works through its master plan, and as it works through the many master plans that they're going to be taking up. So that's a piece of it. There's also the flip side of this is upzoning in the right areas. In fact, the planning department is recommending an across-the-board increase in permitted density in these centers, these targeted areas. Because the densities that were created way back when, in 2014 through 18, in the new zoning ordinance, they're already out of date. This moves slow. So those increases in density are part of an omnibus revisions bill that's actually before the council right now. I think the first reading it's next week, the first reading. So another thing that we could do moving forward is and there's already some progress made on this, but we can continue to reinforce the council's move away from what are called text amendments, which aren't always very site specific, but they often are. And this is what they tend to do is, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the tool, but it's a tool that you want to use very carefully because often it facilitates inappropriate development. It's even the irony of the townhouse debate that we're talking about right here, is that many of the projects that have been criticized, the townhouse projects that have been criticized, that are the anecdotes behind the townhouse bill, a lot of them are on land where townhomes are prohibited. But it's a text amendment that allowed the townhomes to be proposed. So again, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the tool, but you just got to be really careful about how to use it. The other thing is we need a government-wide commitment to making it easier to develop in the centers. It's not just us, it's all the different facets of government so that the urban projects don't face a competitive disadvantage to suburban projects. I mean, in part, let's be clear, the market is tougher in Prince George's County. It costs the same thing to build multifamily in Prince George's as it does in Montgomery or DC or Fairfax or Howard or Anne Arundel. Pretty much the same cost, but by and large, the rents aren't there in Prince George's County. If you can get, $4 or $5 a square foot for building multifamily in DC, and you can only get, say, $2.25 or $2.50 at the high end per square foot for building that same multifamily in Prince George's, it barely pencils out. And if you're a for-profit developer, you know where you're going to be making more money. So it's not the land value that's the big issue. Really, it's the cost of development versus how much rent you get. Much more to say about that if you have questions. But again, I just think it's a factor that we have to consider. So what have we already done, or what do we need to do more? What have we already done and what can we do more of? We're streamlining the approval process in targeted areas, and we can do more of it. We're loosening what are called APF requirements, adequate public facility requirements, for things like roads and schools and public safety. We got to be careful. We need those resources, but we also want to incentivize the development in the right places. So we are looking to loosen those requirements in targeted areas. Find the right financing mechanisms in the targeted areas. There's all sorts of tools that we use, tax increment financing, other things, community development block grant funding. There's lots and lots of finance tools that we need to be targeting in these areas that we are doing and we can do more of. And then, so much around this is around public infrastructure in the center. So here's an opportunity for us as the planning board to assist with this. Is one of the things that we're playing with right now is the possibility of providing an annual evaluation of the county's, and of course our own, but the county's CIP, capital improvement program, essentially the budget that builds things. And can we look at that through the lens of Plan 2035 and say which projects the counties are funding are actually going to move us in the right direction and which ones aren't going to move us in the right direction? And we provide some analysis around that. That analysis can help with the decision making. Anything we can do to make public land available for urban projects, anything we can do to facilitate land assemblage for the private sector, all these are tools that we can use to move it forward. In the new zoning rewrite, there's something called planned developments, and this is a really useful tool for us to help incentivize the development of the places we want it. It essentially says, we'll give you, in these targeted areas, we'll give you greater density in exchange for measurable, significant public benefits. And so I think this is a real opportunity for us. Out of the corner of my eye, I just saw Yuri say, why only roads? I assume he's talking about bike ped. And let me just say, for every step of this, and I'll get to this a little bit more, but the more we can do bike and ped oriented development, trail oriented development, the more successful we're going to be. It's just critical for the county. So on a final note on the townhouse bill, regardless of the council members and council's intentions, which I'm not questioning that, I get it. And regardless of where their heart is, I personally don't see, nor does the staff see, planning department see, that this housing type is the problem. So to the contrary, this housing type and other types of what you might call missing middle housing, more affordable, more flexible housing, rather than the large lot, single family, detached housing. It's actually incredibly important for us. This includes accessory dwelling units, all these things that we need to be taking on, doing more of. And of course, it's always, always, always the issue of doing it in the right location. But we got plenty of land where we can do that. The thing I would wrap up with is, the folks, so many of the folks were here and RISE and Coalition for Smarter Growth. I mean, I would say, you probably, we could call you a YIMBY organization as opposed to a NIMBY organization. By and large, you want to see quality development in the right places. And so what role can you all play in this? There's many things we can do, but there are things you can do as well. Take the Blue Line Corridor as an example. This is a wonderful placemaking opportunity. If we can figure out how to organize the people and the businesses around this common vision, we can help build a head of steam around opportunities such as Morgan Boulevard. There's just a lot of work to do there. And this placemaking has been some of our greatest successes. Yes, I was involved in the Arts District, which at its core was a placemaking initiative. It was around saying, what can we do to tell the market that this is a good place to invest in? And it worked. It really did work. We see a whole lot of new development up and down the Route 1 corridor, and we did it in a way that led to almost no displacement. And the gentrification that occurred actually helps build wealth for people who live in the communities, and that can be a very powerful thing. So I want to see more of that, like with the Arts District, with Blue Line Corridor, and Creative Suitland, which is a burgeoning effort right now, and I'm so proud of that one too. So much more to say, and many, many questions that you may have around, what we can do, how we all internally can play nicely with each other, housing policies. There's all sorts of technical pieces that we can dive into, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But by and large, my experience has been, not all, but most of us have the same goals, and we just have some hard decisions to make around not just the carrots, not just how we incentivize development in the right places, but also the sticks, how we say, no, it's not going to be helpful to have it happen here. And what are the best tools to do that don't bring a chilling effect to the market, because our market's a little more fragile, and we got to be mindful of that as well. That's it. I'm going to stop there. I'm excited to be able to get into dialogue with you, answer any questions you have. And I thank RISE and the Coalition for Smarter Growth for all of your time and energy to organizing this. And let's dive in. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chairman Shapiro. Really appreciate you offering some thoughts and perspective to get us started. I'm going to get our conversation kick-started with one or two questions. And then we're going to kind of open it up to the group a little bit. Like I said earlier, please feel free to offer comments in real time, questions in real time in the chat, react to other people's comments. Both myself and Kyle are screening for that, and whenever we see any patterns, we'll use that to highlight and lift up a question for Mr. Shapiro or anyone else on the call. With that, one of the questions I have for you is like a little process oriented to get started, which is to say, you had talked about there being an analysis of growth and development, both in terms of new housing and new jobs, both inside and outside of activity centers that have happened in the past 5 years. Is that getting updated anytime soon? There's been a lot that's happened post the pandemic with people working differently. So like the office market is of a different strength than it used to be. Like when's the next time we're going to get an update on Plan 2035?
I mean, it's a great question. I don't have the answer to it. And I thought that we were in the process of doing the update right now, but I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of tempted because I know we have some staff on, they might be able to have an answer, but the short of it is I don't know. But if it's not being done, it needs to be done ASAP. Okay.
That sounds great. Well, I will like offer a recommendation for one other thing before I get to a different question. Just in line with what you're talking about with the planning department, offering some analysis on how capital improvement project proposals align with our TOD goals and vision. Like, I think maybe something similar, like maybe needs to happen around like cost of services, like at least maybe like on a marginal level in terms of like the differences of like dense development. Like I know we like to use like reference points when we're doing long-term planning about like what might be a national or regional benchmark might be for this stuff. But I think to make the case locally and to help show our local community members and civic leaders what's the benefit of like dense development inside the Beltway versus having sprawling subdivisions in far out places, I think requires more like real and actionable data so that people understand what are the consequences of like having more dense development in parts of like inside the Beltway communities that aren't even at transit stops, because that might create more opportunity for the county to grow its revenue base more quickly than more sprawling development in other places.
Can I pick up on that, Bernard, just for a second?
Sure.
Because it's such an interesting question, right? Because for me, it feels intuitive, but we all are coming at this from different places. I mean, the mantra that I've used, healthy or not, the mantra that I've often used is that, like, for instance, traffic congestion. And I don't want to talk about traffic congestion. Some of it is just bad planning and it's stupid. But often, traffic congestion is the price we pay for quality development, right? If you want to see quality urban places with the retail that we want and the other amenities that we want, then it comes with a little bit more density congestion. And that's, for me, that's okay, right? But again, what the worst case is when you're in an area where the congestion is really bad and you don't even have the amenities.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have a number of those places in the county, and that's like the worst of both worlds. I see Ms. Taylor nodding her head. So I think she can connect with that, right? But again, for Ms. Taylor and for others, if we live in a place where the amenities are rich and we feel great about all the pieces around us, you know, it's okay to have a little bit more traffic congestion for that. That's my view. So Bernard, that's an example of how I respond to your question about this sort of give and take, what the value is. It's a little bit more subjective, but it's about, do we like the quality of life that it brings?
Totally. To that point, like one of the questions that people have often in the chat are different questions about impact fees and how that might impact infrastructure, especially outside of the Beltway. I know you talked earlier about downzoning. Like, could you share a little bit about like what are the policy tools that could be available to the council or the planning board in terms of developing an urban growth boundary, and like what would that mean, and what would it mean to talk about not creating new water and sewer extensions? Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of tools. Some of them are technical in nature, but I mean, the short of it is there's all sorts of approvals that the council does, and that we do to some degree, that you can tweak. Water and sewer is an interesting one, right? If for a neighborhood to sort of get the density of development it wants, there's a process of water and sewer category changes that have to happen. Basically says, you know, we're going to let you develop here and you have to have better water sewer infrastructure, and we're going to allow that to happen. Well, the council could essentially say in any areas that are sort of designated as future growth areas, we're just going to stop. We're not going to approve any water and sewer category improvements. And we're going to prioritize areas that make more sense for development. I mean, the council can do that. We can't. The council can do that, though. And that's a helpful tool. The council, can, working with the state, depending on which piece of it is, the council and the state can come together and provide even more incentives for, we have some, but even more incentives for relaxing the adequate public facilities investments in certain areas and bumping them up in other areas. You play with the economics to say, here's where we want development, here's where we don't. We have a lot of tools to do it if we find the will. And again, for many of these things, we have made progress, and there's more to do because we are fighting against a market which isn't always friendly to us.
Gotcha. I have one more from me, and then I'm going to open it up and see if Kyle's found something to lift up amongst everybody in the chat so far. But like one question I got from several folks as I was preparing for this conversation was like lots of debate around whether or not some of the assumptions around the townhouse moratorium made sense, but a lot of other people suggesting, well, we should just do this instead. And so if you had like a short list of like 3 or 4 things that you thought the county could do legislatively, or from like a budget standpoint, to like activate development around TOD tomorrow, like instead of debating what types of houses we should have, what would some of the alternatives be?
It's all the ways to, again, the carrot is in the places where we want to see the development, all the ways that we can lower the cost and lower the burden of developing in those areas, the more likely it is to happen, right? And there's tons of ways to do it. But one of the ways that we can really come in is around infrastructure, because those are big ticket items, whether it's parking as appropriate, bike ped infrastructure, say, the Central Avenue Connector Trail along the Blue Line corridor. That's a major government investment that I think is going to pay off around economic development when it's built. How else do we lower the cost of development? We have tools. We have tax increment financing. We have one of the things called pilots, which is a payment in lieu of taxes. These are all just ways to buy down the cost of development in the areas where we want it, the right kind of development areas we want it. But there's nothing more magic than making it cheaper and easier to build to incentivize building what we want built in the right areas. It's just it's that simple in concept.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm gonna try to kick it over to Kyle. Do you have any?
Yeah. Hey, Bernard. Hello, Chair Shapiro. One question from Donald James. I think is a good place to start. Many people don't understand the development process and how it works in the county. Can you explain how the entities work in regards to zoning and development? i.e. like the planning board, developers, the council. Can you just kind of, for folks that might not be as versed in the zoning development process, kind of give us a quick overview of how all these entities interact with each other in the county?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I mean, in short, if a developer wants to, let's say they're looking at the, I don't know, Southern Avenue Metro Station, and they own a piece of land next to it, right? What do they got to do? I mean, first they make sure it's zoned appropriately. You go through, there's all the entitlement process that you have to go through, but the biggest hurdles tend to be if you can't do it by right, if you can't just build what you want to build because the zoning allows every inch of it, then you've got to get our approval, right? You've got to get the planning board to accept whatever special exception changes or variation or variance changes, all the ways in which it has to be tweaked, and we have to be okay with the tweaking. For many developments, once it's passed through, if it's passed through us, and once it's passed through us, it often will then go to the district council. All the district council is the county council, but wearing another hat. Now, the authority that the county council has in this regard as the district council to do what's called calling up projects, which means the county council can say, I want to, yeah, planning board approve that one, but we want to take that off of the consent agenda. We want to look at that again. That authority that the district council has is really, really unique in the region and pretty unique in the country. And when I was a council member, I kind of got it, and there were ways in which I liked it, right? But it has a bit of a chilling effect on development, because it puts so much risk and uncertainty into the process. You're a developer, you have a good project, community's on board, you want to run with it, and then the county council basically says at the last minute of your development stage, I'm not even going to guarantee you can get it approved, and I'm going to add another, whatever, 6 to 18 months onto the process. That's a problem. That was a bit of a segue, because short of it is what typically happens is this district council very appropriately reviews, approves, boom, has concerns, and it moves forward. Then, once you have your entitlements, once there's an approved, then you have a whole permitting process. That's a separate issue. But it's a long process from beginning to end for a complex project. If it's mixed use residential, retail, blah, blah, blah. I mean, a rock bottom minimum of 18 months for that whole process. And then construction starts. So it's slow and time consuming. Even more reason why the more incentives we can bring to the front end for the right development in the right places, the more successful it is. And for Mr. James, I hope that gets at least the basis of it. And if there are more questions, I'm happy to answer it.
And another theme, I'm kind of merging a couple of questions here, but just particularly like with density outside of the Beltway, lack of infrastructure, as opposed to some of the new zoning around some of the transit zones, folks feeling like the zoning isn't necessarily adequate to urban standards. I think somebody mentioned some zoning around the Purple Line having too much parking. How do we reconcile some of these, how we're zoned and how development is kind of being steered in terms of ensuring that the type of development is conducive to the environment we want to create in the neighborhood?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think we've made a lot of progress, and there's still some examples where we have more work to do. I mean, if you're looking at a Purple Line station and it's surrounded by a sea of parking, yeah, that's a missed opportunity. And we need to look at that. And there are tools that we can use to look at it. There's, you can, the broader level, you can do a sectional map amendment and look at a broad area and try to, figure out how best to rezone that area. But there's also sort of smaller, more nimble versions of that. There's the, I'm having a senior moment around the language, but essentially you can get a smaller you get a few parcels and a minor map amendment, that's it. So, and a minor map amendment is a much quicker process, and it's a more targeted tool that if there's a case to be made that this zoning is wrong for this opportunity, and we go down the minor map amendment route, then we could fix something like, why is there a sea of parking around a Purple Line station? Again, so much of this is we're talking about the carrots. What are the incentives we can use to get the right development, how to upzone to get the kind of quality we want in certain places. The more complicated conversation often is around the sticks. How do we stop the development where we don't want it? And what are the tools what are legally the tools that we can use? And also, what are the ones we can use that don't, again, put too much of a chilling effect on the market, because that has all sorts of unintended consequences. You think that gets at it, Kyle? Is that?
Yeah, I believe that's a overview. Sorry, I'm just kind of reading some of these other questions. One here that jumps out is from Kevin Fisher. How does the planning board balance trying to drive, green light any willing commercial development, even if it's kind of, I guess, quote unquote, more of the same? I know you hear a lot of folks say, oh, it's kind of this cookie cutter development happening all over, right? So how do you balance it on a planning board trying to, like you said, grow our commercial tax base the investment that is that's current and present with the aspirational improvements that we're trying to make in communities and amenities over time. Kevin, I hope I kind of worded that correctly, but Peter, does that make sense as a question?
It does. And I just looked at this question too, just so I can get a sense of it. I mean, for me, this is this whole carrot and stick thing again. I mean, a lot of what Kevin is talking about here for me is, you know, what are the sticks? You know, how do we restrict more development in the places where we don't want to see it? And what are the best tools to do that? You know, that's sort of a rural suburban edge way to look at it. In the more inner suburban areas that are not the urban areas, but the inner suburban areas, you know, how do we get the development to be organized in the way we'd like to see it? And a lot of that is you can do sort of a, you know, there's a town center style development that can work in more suburban areas where you do mixed use development. So the amenities are right there and that people need to drive less for the things they want to go to. And there's any number of examples of that around the region. We just have fewer of them in Prince George's County. You know, we're very, in planning terms, what's called Euclidean, which means that you got your housing here, you got your commercial here, you got your industrial there, and, you know, and that's the way the world's supposed to be. And it's like, no, I mean, you know, we're much better off having mixed use developments, even if they're not around metro stations, because there's, again, some inner suburban areas or suburban areas where we can benefit from that, and they can be less car oriented and more bike ped oriented. I mean, I think for me, that's the answer to Kevin's issue, which is, you know, just let the council have that be the orientation as they approach master plans, so so developers have the incentive to build those kind of developments. I mean, let me give you an example. Woodmore Town Center, which I love, and my offices are near, and it serves us in lots of ways, and I love the Wegmans and all these things. But I mean, that development is so hungry for more mixed use. And even in their mini way, and I'm not slapping a developer, I'm just saying when you look at what was approved there, you got all the housing over here, you got all the commercial here and some wonderful commercial, but the commercial is essentially around a sea of parking. And that development is not a particularly walkable development. It's just not. It serves the county in many, many ways, and it feels like a missed opportunity not to have a more integrated development. And I'd like to see more of those integrated developments in the county.
Totally, because it could be a place that you could hang out at, like Riverdale Park Town Station.
Yeah, I mean, look, right? Part of what we're trying to do with the Arts District is say, hey, it'd be fun to go to Hyattsville for the day.
Yep.
We can shop, there's arts, there's galleries, there's restaurants, we can walk around, great. You know, I'm at Woodmore Town Center all the time for different things. Pardon me, I like my Best Buy, I like my PetSmart, I like my Wegmans, but it's not like I'm going to hang out at Woodmore Town Center for the day. Because there's no there in that regard, right? There's no sort of town square-ish thing to it. And that's that's the point.
Totally.
Another question. Sorry, Bernard. This last one, I'll give it back to you. But this is from Alana Pitts. Do you know if there are any discussions going on about building code reforms, like allowing single-stair buildings? You mentioned that laws are being passed in other states. Is there any conversation in your circles, Peter, about that?
You know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'm happy to follow up with you, Ms. Pitt, and you know, talk to the staff about it, but I just don't have enough information about it.
And then the last thing I'll just point out is more so a comment. I know the planning department has a planning academy. Sorry, I'm trying to find so Prince George's County Neighborhood Planning Academy, shameless plug, free class from the planning department, all about the planning process in Prince George's County. Tony Phelps added a link into the chat. Definitely check that out.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Phelps, for the shameless plug. And it's a great opportunity for folks. Could not endorse it more. So please sign up.
And in particular, for anybody on the call who was interested in Donald's question around like, what is the role of developers versus citizens versus the county council versus the planning board? Like, who are the different stakeholders? How does the zoning and land use approval process relate to what gets built? And how does it sometimes not relate to what gets built? Because there are a lot of things that happen before someone with a piece of land wants to do something there that's already been put in place, that already kind of shape what's possible for given parts of the county. And thank you to Kyle and Chair Shapiro for highlighting it. The Neighborhood Planning Academy was a really great contribution of one of our RISE steering committee members to adding to the set of tools that exist for folks in the county to take use of. And so we definitely want everybody to use it. One of my questions that kind of builds off of this like bigger conversation that Elena referenced around shifting away in some cases from single family zoning is that in other parts of the region, including Arlington, there's been a discussion of, especially in places that are inner beltway suburban communities, so like what we would call established communities, or many of our TOD centers, would be places that in other parts of the region, they're talking about upzoning. They're talking about introducing duplexes and triplexes and 5 and 6 and 8 plexes and different kinds of multifamily on what might have been traditionally like smaller lot parcels. What do you think are some of the opportunities for pushing some of those kinds of land use and zoning changes in Prince George's? And how do you think that could possibly connect to some people in the community's interest for a wider variety of options when it comes to like housing facades and housing types on the market, which has been one of the criticisms of the townhouse bill?
Yeah, I mean, great question and really complicated. I mean, so wearing my sort of quasi-academic hat, I mean, part of the issue here is around issues around both race and class in the county, right? And so an example of this, let me call this the Mitchellville problem, or opportunity, depending on your view. And this comes from my experience as a council member with one of my mentors, who I wouldn't call a smart growth advocate, but he was certainly a champion for Prince George's and growing wealth in the county, especially Black wealth, which was Wayne Curry, right? And so part of what he was committed to was creating vibrant middle and upper class majority Black communities, which were not always available throughout the region. This was a unique thing, right? And so, we still have a lot of people in the county who are just, who feel very, very proud of and with the opportunity to live in single family, large lot, detached home communities that are majority African American.
Yep.
And so here's this race, class, land use, environment, complex dilemma about what's the right thing to do. And the way I look at it is, it's part of the pun, it's not black or white, right? There's no simple solution to it. I think we can do a lot more to bring missing middle housing into more communities while still preserving some measure of single family detached, larger lot communities as well. I think we have plenty of land and plenty of development to ease our way to doing both. Accessory dwelling units are a good example. I think accessory dwelling units can be a pretty widely adopted tool throughout the county that aren't really going to compromise the quality of the communities in which they come in. That doesn't mean they should be in all communities, but I think they could be in a lot more communities, as an example. Now, does that mean, in Mitchellville, we're going to upzone Mitchellville to allow for a whole bunch of duplexes? Probably not going to happen.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
I don't mean to pick on Mitchellville, because I live in a community like that. I mean, so pardon me, because I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, because I live in College Heights Estates, which is a large lot, single family, detached home community just outside of College Park in unincorporated Hyattsville. And I like it. I like it. I also like that I'm only 5 minutes away from Riverdale, Park Station, so I have all the urban amenities. But so I get it too, right? I get both sides of this.
No, and I think lots of folks that live in like the developing tier and live in suburban parts of our county enjoy the proximity to suburban town centers, whether that's Riverdale Park Station or Woodmore Town Center, or even Branch Avenue, which is where we're hoping to go with one of our September events later on this year. Kyle, Kyle, any more questions that you saw kind of pop up in the chat? And
Sorry.
the last thing I wanted to highlight before Kyle hopped in with some more questions is if anyone in particular had a burning question that they wanted to offer before we wrapped in the next like 5 to 10 minutes, if you could like raise your hand, like we might have time for like 1 or 2 direct questions from the audience as well.
So I'll highlight Janet Gingo's question related around how do we incentivize climate conscious development. I know that you might have hit on some elements of that in some earlier responses, Peter, but do you have any thoughts? I know we're all experiencing the heat. The country is experiencing extreme heat and extreme weather and climate disasters. And so how do we as Prince George's County kind of incentivize the type of development that is more aware and sustainable from a climate perspective?
Well, I think Janet's question, I'm looking through it's a lot. And I think it's, she makes some excellent points, excellent points. So yeah, I mean, all these things, we should do more to incentivize this kind of development, especially for new construction. There's some move around the council around this. I mean, even something as simple as, I think it's Councilmember Denoga, Chair Denoga, I think if I'm remembering correctly, that he's now pushing for mandatory EV infrastructure chargers for new home development. I think that's what he's working on right now, or did. And that's a small example of it, right? That's, you know, it feels, you got to be mindful of the cost impact, but this is a useful thing to do. There's other, you know, when I was on the DC Zoning Commission, you know, it was kind of a joke I was made fun of, but every single project that came before us, I wanted to make sure that they were either solar ready or had solar panels on the roof or some other kind of passive energy built into the project. We can do more of that in Prince George's County, and we also can incentivize it by bringing more of our own, emphasizing more of our dollars on that kind of green infrastructure. I think all these things, there's a million different versions of it, and yeah, you know, this is like ripe for Janet. It's like ripe for a task force to make sure we're doing as much as we can in all these endeavors. I don't think the whole emphasis needs to be on the private developer. I think we, as government entities, can do more as well.
Okay, thank you. Really quick, I saw questions from Yuri, and then if Ron Thompson's still around, Ron, and then I'll take something from one other person, and then we'll probably wrap.
All right, but Yuri can't ask anything about bicycling, okay? That's fine.
Take it away, Yuri. Maybe Cheryl's working on it.
I think, Cheryl, could you help Yuri unmute?
Yeah, hold on.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Oh,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, we did hear you, Yuri.
Okay.
Okay, success.
Not press it again.
Okay, can you hear me now? Excellent.
We can hear you now.
Chairman Shapiro, this is a question sort of about Blue Line Corridor, but about generally like your power and generally all the power that is available within different count. I mean, maybe like a way to wrap up this conversation. As you know, I went to several of your hearings and I asked, why do we have 7-Eleven being built next to Metro Station, while we're having a warehouse being built next to Metro Station, an advanced auto parts store? And my understanding from going to all the meetings with you is that the planning board doesn't really have a power to incentivize very specific projects. So the question is, how do we, why not? You know, I don't even know what I'm asking really, but I'm asking is, why did I witness you have, and clearly you weren't, you know, a huge fan of those projects, but you're following the laws. The planning board has a role to play. So you're doing your job very well. You have a council lawyer watching you doing this, but then it breaks my heart to see this beautiful, wonderful parcels of lot walking distance to the station being dedicated to such terrible uses. So what is in the system that can hopefully change that we don't see this, that we see mixed use development? Thank you.
That's a great question, Yuri. I mean, part of the problem is that much of what we're talking about, the uses are much less regulated, right? So when I mean uses, I mean, if retail is allowed, most of the time we don't have the right to say, you know, it has to be a white tablecloth restaurant, and it can't be a Chipotle. that level of use distinction is hard to do when you're talking about these sort of broad land use and zoning. Now, one of the ways that it can be done is if there's a planned development, again, and the more we see of those, now we have an opportunity to have them, Uri and others, and the more developers take advantage of that, the more we can say, we're going to give you more density if you bring these kind of amenities, if you will bring these benefits to the community. And those benefits can include a certain quality of retail. I mean, in DC, again, wearing my DC hat from a while ago, we would get pretty darn narrow around the kind of uses we wanted to see when it was in DC called a planned unit development. So I think that's an opportunity for us here in Prince George's. But again, the council can be more restrictive around the kind of zoning when they approve plan changes, master plan changes. But you're not going to see them get that specific around that sort of fine grade of the kind of retail and things like that. It's tough. It's not easy. A lot of this has to do with what the market does or doesn't bring. I'm compelled to respond to Steve Hartig, who's talking a lot about parking minimums and other folks. And let me just say, I personally like the idea of getting rid of mandatory parking minimums. And there's a lot more to do around it, and since doing that in the right locations. But I'm certainly used to in DC and in other jurisdictions where, you know, it takes a huge burden off the developer and let the market determine. Let them determine how much parking they want for the development. They're not going to build a development that's not going to work. So, you know, that's my experience at least. So I'm totally open to that.
No, that makes total sense. Elena, we'll add a really quick question. But yeah, let's do Elena, and then thanks for answering Stephen's question as well, Chairman Shapiro.
Yeah, I've been dying to know about parking minimums too. It seems like low-hanging fruit. But maybe my question is related to low-hanging fruit. What do you see as the easiest wins that housing abundance advocates can push for in Prince George's County right now?
Well, I think the biggest thing, Elena, and others is, again, it's a market piece, right? It's just this where I started. If it costs the same amount to build here as it does in DC or Fairfax or Montgomery or Howard, but our rents are lower, then we've got to figure out a way, much lower. We've got to figure out a way to change market perception, which is a major emphasis on placemaking, make it more desirable. People will pay a bit more. And then also reduce the burden, the costs associated with it, which means speeding up the process and paying for some of the infrastructure and being willing to do that in the right places, you know, for the development we want. Allowing for more density can do that too, but often the density restriction isn't because we limit the density, it's because the market isn't going to bring the density at this time. That's why you see a whole lot of what's called stick-built housing, you know, housing that's made mostly of wood and is 5 stories or lower, rather than poured concrete, which can go a whole lot higher. There's not much of a market for that here. And I'm not saying that stick-built is an inherently bad thing. It isn't good density, but yeah, it'd be nice to see opportunities where you can get even more density around metro stations, more urban core areas. So I think that's the short answer to it. Find a way to sort of bring even more incentives to it.
Thanks, Chairman. We're going to take one more question, and I think I'm going to wrap things up because that's actually a good transition to our next set of RISE events that I look forward to seeing many of you all at in August and September. Ron Thompson, fire away.
I'm looking for Ron. Ron, raise your hand. Oh, there he is. Oh, there we go. Oh, hold on.
All right, here we go. I'm going to try to keep this question short. And Chair Shapiro, you know this because as you keep mentioning, and I'm going to ding you because you ran for office in DC some time ago. But you know this. You know, DC has. You talk a lot about the powers of the DC Zoning Commission and things that we're doing or that the district are doing. You know, one of the things as we talk about zoning that we often miss is that, to a point you made about the poured concrete, the cost, making things pencil out. there is so much that Prince George's County can do to subsidize in the way that DC is doing around housing with, which is kind of unique in the country. We have this, our Housing Affordability Trust Fund. What role do you think the state, and I think advocates have to play in making sure that the state across Maryland is funding a trust fund to put into localities and counties so they're able to build housing? I'll say I did grow up in DC, and I know that there's great deals of opportunity along Southern Avenue, and I guess that's South County, but it just doesn't pencil out to do development like that without rigorous and robust subsidy. So what should advocates be doing at the state level, and what is happening at the state level to get that sort of subsidy for those projects that just can't pencil out as of right now?
I mean, Ron, it's a great question, and I think you have a nice solution already. I mean, we have a housing production trust fund in the county. It's relatively small, but it's active, and we have other tools, right of first refusal. We have some finance tools, but yeah, I mean, y'all want to advocate for the state to sort of quadruple the size of our housing production trust fund with state money. That'd be a winner. That'd be a winner, because the more incentives we have to get the kind of development we want, you're right. The cost of development, isn't the barrier in the county. It's not being able to get the rents that we want in the county that are the barrier, because the cost of development is the same. But if we can buy down the cost, then that's okay, right? That helps. I do think the placemaking efforts are just as important as buying down the cost of development. And I think the combination of those two in specific targeted areas can transform the county's economy in just the way we want.
That is really, really great, because I think that's a really great segue to the next thing that we wanted to talk about, which is what we want to do next with all of you, which is hopefully see more of you at more of our Rise Prince George's events later on this summer and fall. On Cheryl, I want to make sure I get this right. Is it August the 12th?
That's the downtown Largo thing. So
sorry, the 15th.
Yes,
My apologies.
August 15th.
I want to make sure I got both right. So on August 15th, we here at Rise are going to have another Zoom conversation with County Councilman Eric Olson to talk about some legislation, a package of legislation, actually 3 bills that he is proposing to help make sure that our county public works department works with new development in different parts of the county to make sure that we build out complete streets, so that as we have more development close into transit stations, and especially our other activity centers and inner beltway communities, we're building out the sidewalks and the other infrastructure that turns, big like parking lots of shopping malls into like active, vibrant places. We are going to have like an initial conversation for advocates and folks that want to go deep on all those pieces of legislation, which is part of the reason why Councilman Olson and his staff are going to be with us for a Zoom on the evening of August 15th. And then the Saturday before that, on August 12th, the Prince George's Planning Department and the Largo Town Center Association and folks in the County Executive's Office are having a big placemaking festival that a bunch of my neighbors here in Largo are helping to put together. And, would love to have you come out and see that as well, because one of the things that we want to start pushing on this fall, to everyone's questions around what is next to help unlock development that we need around TOD, is that I think part of what Chairman Shapiro was referring to and his next steps in the fight is that we're going to have to push for capital investments to make sure that new housing and police stations and fire stations are built around our established metro sites in order to fill some of those financing gaps. And in addition to that, we also need to invest in local community organizations, whether it's farmers markets or grassroots community groups that are bringing attention and dynamism to a lot of our central and South County places that don't yet have like a strong identity, regional identity, and sense of momentum behind them. And so that combination of placemaking and capital investment are 2 big things that we're focused on for the fall. Part of that is about making sure that our county and developers build out our transportation infrastructure the right way. And that's why it's really important to have you join us on August 15th for a Complete Streets Zoom briefing. And then in September, we're going to gather again for a walking tour around the Branch Avenue Metro Station, and also a tour of the new food hall down across from the U.S. Customs and Immigration Services headquarters, which is going to be our next chance to gather as a group and our chance to push to make sure that complete streets and placemaking are key ingredients in a walkable urban future here in Prince George's. And with that, I think we have come to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I offered a little bit of context in the chat that if you want more information on how to stay connected to us, or a chance to look back at some of the information here, we're going to send up a follow-up email with a link and a video and all the kinds of good information and links, as well as some contact information for our participants here today. Cheryl, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, thank you, Bernard, for moderating this discussion today, and thanks, Kyle,
Thank you,
too,
Bernard.
and Chairman Shapiro. Thanks so much for joining us, and everybody for coming.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And thank you all for organizing. It was nice to talk to everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining and participating in the chat. And thank you, Kyle, for all of your help and assistance in corralling everybody and making sure that folks were well represented and heard. We really love having like really interactive online events, and we need all of you to make sure that that stays the case. Thanks, everybody.